from paying Sauce and paying him? How does that process work, and how are you attacking it?
Between Garrett and Sauce, right?
Between Garrett and Sauce, yeah.
I mean, I think sometimes the deals are just done for you. There's no creativity here with them too.
Yeah.
I think, and this is a bolder prediction by me, I think after this year, Garrett Wilson is going to be in line to be, either the highest or second highest paid receiver in the NFL. Just because that's how it goes, right? Look at how the contracts all go. And then guys will get paid after him, and on it goes, and it'll fall down to 5, 6, 7, 8. It's just how it goes. I think that's the kind of season we're talking about ahead. Sauce, there's nothing left to do. I know it's crazy to say, like, he's going to be the highest paid corner in the NFL. So it's all about timelines, right? I guess my thought would be, in theory, you're not going to pay either of them after year 3 because you don't want that cap hit on the last year of Rodgers being here. You are crunching numbers to maximize the 2-year Rodgers window we have left. Now, I would not let either of them play out the 5th-year option. I would get both of the deals done with them. What you do is you make Sauce the highest paid corner and Garrett Wilson one of the highest paid wide receivers after Rodgers retires after the 2025 season. Because one, it shows the fan base we still have superstar talent, and they are here with us, and they are the cornerstones of our franchise as we move into a new era with a new quarterback, and we're not going to be in the fucking basement for the next 10 years like we were. So that's a good piece of business from a PR standpoint and a football standpoint, but you don't do it until before their 5th-year option seasons. And it's lucky you have the 5th-year option in case negotiations don't go the way you want, but negotiations aren't that. This is the Quinnen Williams combo all over again. They're not that hard when guys are this good.
Yeah. This is slotted in already. Like, just get ahead of it and get it done.
Perfect word. Where
also do this with Michael Carter too. Not as big of a deal, but
Michael Carter's a top 5 slot in terms of finances. They should get that done. The difficult one is not either of them. Now, if the Jets make it difficult, like, don't blame me. That's the Jets' problem, but it's not difficult no matter what they tell you. The difficult one for an actual capologist and a GM is Jermaine Johnson and Breece Hall. Because fortunately for Jermaine, you have the 5th year, and I actually think it's the reverse argument with Jermaine. I actually think if he increases his production 10% from last year, which is a reasonable expectation, I think I pay Jermaine after this year because I'd be nervous that after the breakout, it just goes to a place that you're going to struggle to really figure it out. Like, so Jermaine had 7.5 sacks last year. He was a highly productive 3-down defender. Let's say Jermaine has 9.5 to 10 sacks this year. And you pay him, you're not paying him like Myles Garrett or TJ Watt. You're paying him, though, top 10 edge money. And it's going to age really well. Because what if Jermaine in year 4 turns into a 13-sack player that's also playing the run? That's the difference. He's not a pass rush specialist. He's also playing the run. Then you're going to owe Jermaine what? Are we going to get into the territory where we're paying Jermaine Johnson $30 million a year one day? At some point, you're going to run out of cap space. So that's my argument has always been to pay Jermaine, and maybe even, I don't know if Breece would accept this, but my thought with Breece was always, he's going to play out the 4 years of his deal. But if he wants before year 4, so after this year, I would pay out both his franchise tags. So you have 6 years of Breece Hall. Franchise tags for the running back, especially after this year, it's just not a high number. It's really, really low. 6 years of team control of Breece Hall. And then you see where his legs are at. And then unfortunately, with the way the position goes, like, we might be getting to the end of the greatness of Breece Hall after 6 years. More likely than not, the science and the trends tell you will. So it's the inverse. I'm trying to pay Jermaine and Breece after this year to save me money down the road, where it just doesn't matter with Garrett Wilson and Sauce Gardner because you're never going to save money. They're just always the next guy up.
It's going to be and a lot of it, I think, is going to depend, of course, how this year plays out. Is there another Rodgers year? Is there 2 more Rodgers years? How close do the Jets really come to getting over the hump? And it's going to be for an organization that hasn't always been great in these challenging, nuanced situations. See the current Hassan Reddick situation. It's going to keep us on pins and needles because Sauce and Garrett in particular have a chance to be just really like cornerstone, long-term faces of the franchise. Not saying that Breece and Jermaine can't do it, but I just think Sauce and Garrett have the ability to be at a different level. Now, let me pivot this
like Curtis Martin jerseys in the stands kind of vibe. Right.
I don't think your prediction that Garrett could finish as the Jets' all-time most productive receiver is crazy at all. That's how talented he is. And Go watch that Browns game. Second NFL game ever. And it feels a little less crazy when you see that. Now, let me give you a more real-time question here because it's almost 5 o'clock. We've been going for like 50 minutes. What is going on in terms of the Jets? Also, Michael Carter just got released by the Cardinals, by the way. A reason was given as a reason not to draft Breece Hall at the time. What is going on right now in terms of the flow of information, right? So how does this work from the Jets front office to the Jets PR department to the Schefters of the world to when the information ultimately filters through from Twitter to our Discord back to us? Like, what does that flow of information look like?
During actual cut downs or just in general in any transaction?
During today, where it feels like there's a much higher concentration of action happening.
Right. So there's a couple things. The roster, I hate saying fodder, but fringe guys, the agents, a lot of times for those guys could be with a smaller agency, and even the ones that aren't, but typically they're with a smaller agency, right? Like CAA and WME and, Athletes First. There's a couple real big ones. They get stars. Then you have a ton of different agents out there. They typically, when their guy gets cut, want to trickle the message to the insider with the biggest reach possible, because the insider can tweet out the player who was released by the team, and then they'll put a little blurb that's, clearly from the agent. So-and-so had a really strong preseason, but it just turned out to be a numbers crunch because the Colts love their 5 tight ends. Like, that's a total ad-libs thing, but this is real. Like, this is what, and then that player's name has a huge reach, and it's kind of advertising them to the entire NFL, all those things like that. So those are the fringe roster players, how it goes. Where you have the most interesting ones to the fan base, Leonard Taylor, Takk McKinley, guys like that. The beat is going to really chase knowing if those guys are there. And credit to the beat, they have boots on the ground. They show up and they're on the practice field. Okay, he's on the practice field. Who are my connections that I could text? Whether it's, and once again, like I don't know who it is, but for a beat writer, it could be the head coach, it could be the GM, it could be a pro director, it could be the offensive line coach, right? You just try to have as many connections as you can. Hey, are you going to keep that guy? And then the answer might be, we'll see. The answer might be, absolutely. You never know what kind of answer you're going to get. So the beat tries to have their team sources to really find out the stories that they care about. Because if you're the beat, they're not trying to find out if Kendall Sheffield made the roster. They're trying to find out if Leonard Taylor made the roster, because the fans are their mentions asking them 40,000 times, hey, is Leonard Taylor on the roster? Is Takk McKinley on the roster? So that's kind of how it goes for the beat writer situation. And then you have, so the agents want the reach, and the team typically doesn't care too much about how the information is overall relayed in these situations, because the team's just going on with what they feel is best. And it's not info that they have to hide. It's not like it's pre-free agency interest, pre-draft interest. There's no really playing games kind of situation. Some teams try to find ways to manipulate to keep a guy on the roster with the team rather than getting swiped, but there's not a lot of info that needs exchanging around that. So that's typically how a cut down day goes, where you have guys that are trying to stick in the NFL, that are trying to get the biggest reach possible. You have beat writers that are trying to find out the storylines that the fans care about the most, which is usually the back end of the roster. And then, you have the variables that, quite frankly, we get no information on from anybody because it's so tight-lipped. But if Hassan Reddick comes back, like, who's the odd man out? Is Hassan Reddick coming back at all? These are the stories that both the agent and the team want to be very, keep their tactics in mind, what info gets out. And sometimes it's better to not let any info out, because if you let info out on one side, then the team or whatever opposite side there is counteracts and releases their own info. And that's how we end up with stories that, the Jets had a promise from Reddick that he was going to play. The Jets, were never promised anything from Reddick and said he would get new money. And you just get conflicting info that the truth often lies somewhere in between.
Yeah. And I always think it's important to remember with Cut Down Day, and we're waiting for this information because it is generally interesting how they're going to do some of the back of the roster shuffling. But a lot of these guys that we're sweating out or not sweating out are probably going to be inactive most weeks. Like, they should not be playing a major role. Now, Leonard Taylor, I feel like, is a bit of an exception. I think he's played well enough where I kind of like to see him in the mix from a playing time standpoint. But even if our guy Brownlee, who's been disappointing this summer, makes the team, like probably not going to have much of an active role in the offense. Same with some of the backup offensive linemen or backup defensive backs. They should not really be on track to be active. We know who the main active players are going to be because this Jets roster is just deeper than it's always been. Do you expect any, beyond what we talked about with Gibson, do you expect any surprises defensively from a personnel usage standpoint week one? Like, what is that snap count looking like for the defensive line?
Well, no, the fun story would have been, is Sauce going to follow Ayuk?
Yep.
And now, even if Ayuk shows up 3 days from now, I don't know if you make that the game plan because Ayuk's not playing 100% of the snaps. So do you just recalibrate your game? That's the fun one to me. The defensive line shuffle, I think what they like about Kinlaw is, and why they asked him to grow to the size of the Incredible Hulk, is that they love that him and Quinnen can play any down of their choosing, where last year they were so fixated on defined roles. And to be fair, it worked for them until it didn't. When Al Woods was on the field, we think you're running. When Quentin Jefferson is on the field, we think you're passing. And those guys were really damn good at what they were asked to do. And then when Al Woods blew out his Achilles, teams were able to run on the Jets. So they think with Quinnen and Kinlaw playing side by side, we're not that predictable anymore. Like, you could try to run at us, but we're bigger in the middle. You could try to drop back and pass, but these guys can rush the passer a little bit. So now, with that being said, Kinlaw's a guy that you need to be careful with his load management. So
let me hit you with the Kinlaw over under, that the Quentin Jefferson one, 6.5 sacks.
I go
line for Kinlaw. Over under.
I go under because they'll manage his reps carefully, and they'll have him play a more boring role than everyone else. The guys that get to pin their ears back and pile up the numbers, in theory, would have been Hassan Reddick. Yep. It'll be Jermaine will be balanced, but he'll get his shots. Quinnen will get his shots. Will McDonald, a lot of his snaps will be passing down snaps. And here's the one that I think should get a bump. Leonard Taylor. If it's 3rd and 12 and Kinlaw just played 1st and 2nd down and is a little gassed because it's been a long day, it's 3rd and 12. They're in shotgun. I know they're dropping back. Say Hassan Reddick's not here. Why am I not having my front be Jermaine Johnson, Quinnen Williams, Leonard Taylor, and Will McDonald? That I'm looking at Leonard Taylor and going, I'm not asking you to read and react. I'm not asking you to contain. I'm not even asking you to be gap responsible. I am simply telling you to be the quickest man off the ball and whoop the absolute shit out of the guard and center in front of you and chase down the quarterback. Nothing else. I'm not asking you to do anything else. That's where, guess what? Leonard Taylor is better at that than Solomon Thomas. He's better than that at Lecky Fotu. There's a world where in a year, he's better at that than Javon Kinlaw. So let's see. He can't hurt you on 3rd and 12. The worst case is he gets blocked, and then one of the other 3 guys gets there. He cannot hurt you in that scenario. Where he can't be on the field is, hey, it's 1st and 10, and Christian McCaffrey's running right at us, and Juszczyk is the lead guy, and Leonard Taylor gets plowed out of the play. Like, that's where you're being careful.
Well, what would you set the line at for Taylor then? Is that like a 2.5, a 3.5? If they Jets get 3 or 4 sacks from him, I feel like that is very nice icing on the cake to what is hopefully, and I'm going right off the top of my head here, let's call it 8.5 from Quinnen, 8.5 or 9 from Quinnen, 9 to 10 from Jermaine.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to put a number on Reddick yet because there's just too many variables. In a normal world, I would have said Reddick would have about 12 sacks this year, but without him at this point, I can't put a number on it. I'm going to say Kinlaw is in the 5 to 6 range. Solomon Thomas will stumble into 2 or 3 sacks. I think they'll blitz a little more. So do you get, a couple from Quincy, a couple from, Michael Carter flying off the edge? He gets 1.5 sacks or something.
Chuck Clark's going to behead somebody at some point.
Will McDonald is obviously the big guess. That would be there's a strip sack. There's a London strip sack for Sam Darnold waiting for us. It's coming.
Yes.
Now, Will McDonald is the most interesting variable because I feel like if you ask some people, they'll say 2 or 3 sacks. Yeah, some people, they'll say 11 sacks. The reality is the truth is probably in the middle. It's like 5.
It's 5.
It's 5.
That's why, yeah.
And that might not be a
3
bad
last
thing.
year, and nobody thinks he played, and he had 3.
You get 5.5 sacks from him this year. You're probably not miserable, especially if you're getting Reddick on. But I'm curious, without Reddick in the discussion, it's a Quinnen and Jermaine thing. Do they get 8-ish sacks each. Does one of them have the 12, 13 sack year? I don't know if Jermaine's ever going to be that kind of guy. And it's not a bad thing. He's just more of a 3-down, more well-rounded player. He feels like 9, 10 sacks is kind of the ceiling for him. But we've seen Quinnen, have that big sack year, even if that's not his core bread and butter. So those are things to watch on defense. Is this the year that Sauce gets more involved in turnovers and that helps silence all of the idiotic haters who are evaluating him by that when it has nothing to do with how well he's playing? But is this the year that the Jets are up more frequently?
He'll have teams 3 picks.
Desperation throwing more. We need, just for the Twitter dialogue and discourse, we need a Sauce pick 6. We need Sauce to have Revis would get these periodically, right? He had the 100-yard interception return on primetime against Miami. He had the game icing interception also against Miami and London. So shout out to that game. He had a primetime interception against Andrew Luck and the Colts in 2015. He would have moments like that.
The Cowboys game,
yes,
9/11.
Yes, to ice the game. Sauce will have more opportunities to do that this year. So defensively, those are going to be some interesting numbers to watch, because I don't think Reed's a big interception guy. Carter's just been robbed on a couple. 2 of the most notorious penalty interception callbacks in recent Jets history, with the Pats and the Chiefs game.
Both
Chuck Clark, calls. Chuck Clark doesn't feel like it. Could Bubble Wrap get involved? Could he grab a couple? Maybe. Those are my defensive.
Somehow has 3.
Yeah, Ashton Davis is going to pay 18% of the snaps and somehow be involved in 5 turnovers like he is every year. All right, we're still waiting. So now we're going to offensively here. The Jets just officially announced the Codrington trade. I just got the push alert on it. We've officially acquired Buffalo's 2026 6th-round pick.
Beautiful.
We'll be mocking that in a couple of years. All right, offensively, some over-unders. I'm going to give you the Garrett, Brandon, Marshall line. Does Garrett get over 1,500 receiving yards this year? Now, I haven't guessed what you're going to say because I've seen your content elsewhere on him, but where's your head at number-wise for him?
15's a lot. I like him at 1450, but because I'm so in on him this year, I'll say he does.
Make the leap.
I begged Barry to make him the ride or die. I think that Garrett Wilson finishes as a top 3 receiver in fantasy this year. So let's have some fun and say fine. Here's the question. He needs the full season to get there. Is there a wonky situation where the Jets can monitor who plays the final game of the season? And not saying they have the 1 seed, but they might be locked into the 4 seed or something. You really need that final game. So, but yeah, sure. Why not?
I had to pinch myself a little bit in doing my fantasy football prep and underdog prep for this year and listening to you guys. And I was listening to some friends of the pod, Heifetz and Danny Kelly doing their, ringer top picks on the Simmons podcast. And there's 2 Jets credibly in the top 10 in most people's rankings. And it's just not a thing. If you're a Jets fan and you've been watching this team never score touchdowns, to hear even people who have maybe light disdain for the Jets or just have no feeling about them either way, be like, Breece Hall and Garrett Wilson are going to be 2 of the 10 most productive offensive players in the NFL this year in most scoring formats. And this team has a good quarterback to take advantage of that. And they have a future Hall of Famer in Tyron Smith. It gets a little jarring still. Now we want to see it in practice. For Breece, I think the number to watch for him from a Jets historical perspective is 1,900. And Curtis Martin, I think, has had a couple Jet seasons where he's had over 1,900 total offensive yards. So for Breece, can he crack that and threaten 2,000 total yards where, that in my mind, that's 1,400-ish rushing yards and 500-ish receiving yards. If he plays 17 games, that doesn't feel insane to me because I think there'll be some games where he has 176 yards rushing because he's just going to rip a 65-yard touchdown.
That's a good point. The rushing is a tough one, right?
It's just that, and it was just a reminder looking back at those stats. Curtis Martin was just so goddamn good, to put up numbers like that in a different era. If we're talking in a world where Garrett and Breece are anywhere near those numbers, things have went very, very right, and they've stayed healthy. And Aaron Rodgers has also stayed